Broadcasting from Orchard Park, New York,
and Boca Raton, Florida,
it's the Freight 360 podcast. From freight broker sales tips to sports talk, this podcast is all about helping you grow as a freight broker. We're your hosts, Nate Cross
and Benjamin Kowalski.
Let's talk freight. Welcome back, episode 280 of the Freight 360 podcast. This is going to be part 3 in a prospecting series. We're going to talk about getting to that point where you're getting an opportunity to quote a brand new shipper, a new customer of yours, and how to get to that level, how to handle those situations. Getting that first load, it's a big milestone. So we'll dig into it here shortly. But first, as always, if you're brand new, make sure to check out all of our other content at freight360.net, including the Freight Broker Basics course for the full-length training that we offer. And we've got all kinds of blogs, podcasts, YouTube videos, downloadable content. You can check out all of our recommended technology and software and all the vendors that we like their products. Subscribe, comment, share us, all that good stuff. Ben, what's happening, man?
Man, week's coming along nice. Weather's nice. I'm pretty excited. I have a dance this Friday. My daughter's in kindergarten, and they're having the daddy-daughter dance, so she's super excited.
Nice, man.
Looking forward to it.
That's awesome.
Snow up in your neck of the woods.
I have a little countdown on my mantle above my fireplace. It's like how many days until we go to Florida, because like the kids love going every single spring, and we're at just over 50 days. So we're counting down the days to get the hell out of Buffalo and migrate down south for the spring.
Looking forward to seeing you guys.
Yeah, man, totally. Sports. All right, really quick. The NFL Pro Bowl. Did you watch any of those events on Sunday? It is like comically silly, like tug of war. These guys are doing like, I don't know, they're running through tires, and then they have a flag football game, which I was surprised. Like there was, I was just curious. I'm like, what would a casino like place odds on a game like that? And I don't think like any of the major ones offered it, but I could still look up on like various websites like what posted odds were, and the over under was like 80 something points, because there's really like there's no line. It's just a bunch. It's quarterbacks throwing to receivers, right? And it was like 80 something. The final score was like well over 100 points. It was just like constant scoring touchdowns and all that stuff. But it was the NFC won. But anyway, it is what it is. But the Super Bowl, here's what I loved is I saw a couple of interviews this week, and it was about, they're interviewing players ahead of the Super Bowl, and the one was to Mahomes and one was to Kelsey that I laughed at. And the one to Mahomes was like, hey, you've got a lot of people that have helped you get to success. Who's your favorite ref? And he basically like tried to answer it honestly, and was like, the refs are all great. We play the game fair. They do a good job. We do a good job. Blah blah blah. But the guy asked it with such a stone cold face, and I think it might have been the same interviewer went to Kelsey and was like, "Who do you love more, Taylor Swift or the ghost 15-yard roughing the passer penalty or whatever?" And I'm like, oh my god. So Kelsey didn't take it as lightly. He basically like blatantly, they asked him like, if there's one question you have for the media, what is it? And he's like, what is it with you guys and the refs? Like, why is everybody following that? Blah, blah, blah. The reality is, man, like everybody in America, unless you're a like actual Chiefs fan, everybody wants the Chiefs to lose.
Yeah,
so
it was funny. I heard they put out a statement. The guy who, I guess, and I don't know what you call it, like the Association of Referees, and I don't know if it's a subdivision of the NFL or a standalone organization, but they put out a statement saying like, there's like 130 some referees. No two referees will basically be over one team like it normally is. Yeah, and they rotate, and they were like, so it is ridiculous to say that, like, there is any favorability. And it's funny because, like, everybody basically commented and went, yeah, but that doesn't mean they all did a good job in those games with that team. Just because there wasn't collusion doesn't mean that, like, there couldn't have been some either unknown bias or that They just did a poor job in those specific matchups.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting too, and then we'll get past this topic. But someone had a post, and it was like every time Josh Allen loses to the Chiefs, a rule has changed in the NFL because like the 13 seconds game, they decided in the playoffs both teams get possession in overtime, which I agree on. And now that the poor ball spot that didn't result in a first down, which would have likely led the Bills to solidify a win and go to the Super Bowl. Now they're saying the technology is available for electronic ball marking. Looking at next year, maybe just in the postseason, which we'll see. We'll see. I mean, if the refs can't get the placement of the ball right, and you have technology to do it,
yeah,
I don't know.
I mean, again, I heard another guy said I think it was Gene Steratore was talking about. He was like the pylons. He's like, I'll bet there's $400,000 worth of cameras in a pylon. Do you mean to tell me you can't put technology in the football to determine where it was?
And they said like even Roger Goodell, the commissioner, said like the technology's there. They've been testing it, and they're looking at implementing it, as early as next season. So we'll see. And you'll have more
kind of in golf, more
replay assists and all that stuff. But yeah. NFL, Super Bowl coming up. Who do you think takes the win?
Maybe they're just wishful thinking, but I clearly want Philly to win.
Yeah.
I wouldn't bet on them to win. I don't know what the line is.
I'm with you. I think Saquon Barkley is just so good. And I don't know. The Chiefs are the Chiefs, though, man. It's, it's going to... I honestly hope it's just a good, clean football game. Clean meaning like there's no controversy. Because these two teams played a few years back, and Philly lost to Kansas City in the Super Bowl. And this was a game where there was literally a debatable, controversial flag thrown that put Kansas City in a position to late in the game, late in the fourth quarter, to go down and score for a win. So, I don't know. Tough to say. But yeah, I'm with you. I wouldn't be surprised if either team wins. My household will be rooting for the Eagles. So, go Birds. Okay, news. What'd you see on the tariffs this week? And again, this drops Friday. We're recording Wednesday. I put the newsletter together on Monday night, and by Tuesday morning, the newsletter was like... the data was like slightly incorrect. So it's an ever-changing thing. But right as it stands now, like the Mexico and Canadian tariffs have been paused. But what is your take on all of this? Is it going to go anywhere? Is it all just like people flexing and it's going to just go away? What do you think?
My opinion is like, I honestly don't follow any of it, even though I probably should, even just for the implications in our industry. But I don't, because I genuinely think that so much of it is just posturing and negotiating tactics that like to try to discern what the motivations are, like you're just not going to get the information, right? Like they're not going to put that out there. You wouldn't probably have it unless you were in the inner circle of the people making these calls. So it's like, I didn't really understand the rationale for, like, I think the justification was like drugs and fentanyl or something coming in to the US from China via both of these sides. And maybe they just wanted both countries to do more and didn't think they were. So they used this to leverage both countries, at least putting the perception that they're doing more. I'm like, I don't know if 10,000 Mexican National Guards are going to do anything to resolve anything. Is that a solution? Does that change anything? I'm like, I genuinely have no idea.
Yeah, you put them there, but what are they going to do? Are they actually going to do, what are their rules of engagement? What are their standard operating procedures? All that stuff. Agreed.
Even the Mexico thing, or not the Mexico thing, the Canada thing, like somebody was debating on LinkedIn, some people in our industry, and somebody went like, this is the reason. And the other person went, yeah, but like the empirical evidence shows that most of these drugs are brought in by U.S. citizens. So even if you do increase the manpower, I guess, at the border, like it doesn't really do anything to actually affect change at the cause of the problem.
It reminds me of that movie, We're the Millers. You ever see that one?
Yeah.
Yes, they take the RV down.
Mm-hmm. I mean,
no regrets. Really? Not a single letter?
Not a single letter.
Even China. China said, hey, we're going to impose our own tariffs on the U.S. So we'll see. It's a trade war, man. It's
Yeah.
no one knows. No one knows. But yeah, this stuff can have trickle down impacts on the U.S. domestic market when it comes to the price of goods, not necessarily the cost of transportation. So, but I mean, you had the whole steel issue back in 2017, right? That you had to deal with as it was unfolding. So, if you deal with anything that's imported or exported, be prepared to react to contact as things unfold here in the coming months.
Yeah,
So.
it could be wild. I mean, if they do go into effect, I mean, you would see drastic impacts on transportation, I think. And I don't mean by like the causing the prices to go up, but I think as a result, they will. Like, if you just start imposing tariffs immediately, the thing that happens is everything in transit isn't usually clear as to who is responsible for it. And then everybody wants to argue. Well, then the truckers and us are trying to manage where the loads are going because people don't want to accept them. And then they're going to argue over who's responsible for the tariffs, who's going to pay. At least that's what happened with steel in 17 when I was moving it. And I'm like, you have so many truckloads of auto parts specifically that run back and forth between Canada and the auto manufacturing industry. And I just can't imagine what that would look like the day if they were imposed as to where those trucks go. Do they get delivered? Do they negotiate some of it after? I mean, they would all probably play out on like a case by case basis. Which would drastically either stop shipping for some period of time until it's worked out and then increase. And then you're going to see massive fluctuations, which is good for the industry, creates issues and pushes prices up. Good for carriers, good for us, but it's a lot of work.
Agreed. Changes coming to the LTL world, the class system. And this is nothing new. It's just the timeline of it is pushed back. It was supposed to be in May. Now it's going to be in July. Changes to what you got.
So Stephen pointed this out, and I did see this too this morning. The thing on China related to like small packages, apparently it was a huge number, and I definitely could be wrong with this. I'm going to say it was like 800 million. It might even have been larger than that. Like the number of small packages that basically come from from China, and I can't remember where, but through USPS that they're able to ship and basically subvert, I guess, tariffs because of either the size of the package. So I saw this morning, like USPS is no longer taking like parcel mail from China, I think, into the US. And that's directly going to affect like, well, Temu, I think Shein, a lot of that stuff is now made in the US.
I saw
but
that.
like,
yeah, basically Amazon's the winner in all of this, right?
Yeah, I mean, the U.S. Postal Service said it would temporarily suspend international parcels from China and Hong Kong, cutting off a service that is popular with online vendors in China. The announcement said the inbound service was suspended until further notice and that the change wouldn't affect delivery of letters, but the move comes after the Trump administration imposed new tariffs on China and moved to close a loophole that allows companies to avoid paying tariffs if they ship packages worth less than $800 directly to a U.S. consumer.
There you go. LTL real quick. Updates to the freight class system. Check out our newsletter. We got a link to a good article in there. You can sign up on our website, freight360.net, for the Tuesday and Thursday newsletter. But basically, they're simplifying it in a nutshell. So if you do LTL, they delayed the enactment date by a couple months to give shippers, carriers, and 3PLs a little more time to prepare for it. But it's going to make it easier, simplify. There was basically, in a nutshell, there's like 4 categories either objectively or subjectively they look at to determine freight class, and they're basically trying to make it just a density only thing for the majority of commodities. So I think it was like 44% of commodities are going to be affected in a positive way. Like it's going to simplify how they're classed. Reclass is kind of like the detention of the LTL world. It's unnecessary time and money that can save everybody time and money, and just increase efficiency. So oftentimes you'll see a customer not know the class of their commodity that they're shipping, and it gets quoted. The carrier inspects it, says, no, this is actually class blah, blah, blah. And there's a charge for the inspection plus an upcharge for the new rate. So yeah, hopefully that'll help out. Also, I didn't have it in our show notes, but I was going to talk to you about this the other day, and I never followed up. Have you fallen victim to double brokering, cargo theft, or identity theft? QuickScope stands out as the only load-level fraud protection tool available today. Unlike any other solution on the market, QuickScope is deployed post-agreement between shippers or brokers and carriers. Shippers can rest assured that their cargo remains secure. Brokers can confidently confirm the identity of the individuals on site for pickup, and carriers can trust that they'll receive timely payment. Start your free trial with QuickScope today by visiting them online at quickscope.com. That's QUIKSKOPE.com. Blue Book Services is the resource you need if you're transporting fresh produce or lumber. Their online databases contain thousands of companies throughout the produce and lumber industry supply chains. You can easily search their databases to generate new sales leads. Blue Book's credit ratings help you avoid companies with high credit risk, and their team can help resolve disputed loads. To learn more, go to producebluebook.com or lumberbluebook.com and click Join Today. The let's see, what is it called? The Household Goods Shipping Consumer Protection Act. Right? This is the bill that we lobbied for and tried to get support in DC last September at the Capitol or the Policy Forum on Capitol Hill in DC. And I think you were asking, like, why is it called like household goods, right? And the big thing for us as brokers is, like, part of this bill impacts our industry, but on the whole, it's not all about freight brokering. It's, a lot of it has to do with household goods and the consumer, like the average citizen. But part of this legislation, it is being now, it's fully supported. They got the right amount of members, and now it's being introduced in the House and the Senate. But part of it gives the FMCSA the ability to enact civil penalties, which they did not have before, to go after people that are violating the laws that are there.
So here's the question I had, and this is the thing I was going to ask you, is do they only have the ability to enact civil penalties under the narrow umbrella of household goods, or does the ability to enact civil penalties operate broadly across the industry?
It's broadly
now?
Because the FMCSA handles both household goods and freight. You think about, like, the authorities that get listed, right? Like freight broker, or broker of property excluding household goods, and then broker of property for household goods, and then same thing, motor carrier of property excluding household goods, motor carrier of household goods, right? So the FMCSA now has the ability throughout under their entire umbrella to enact civil penalties. So here's, I think where it came from is if a shipper is fraudulently shipping something, so let's say someone is smuggling, it could be human trafficking, it could be drugs, paraphernalia, whatever, right? It gives them the ability to impose penalties against these fraudulent shippers, carriers that are operating outside their authority, and that spills over into the 3PL and freight space as well. So double brokering, or I shouldn't call it double brokering, illegal or fraudulent brokerage activities, I think is how they actually officially classify it. But if you are brokering freight without the authority to do so, all these complaints that we've had and nothing's been done now, should this legislation that's being introduced in the House and the Senate, should it be passed and signed into law, now they'll have the ability, and they can't say, well, we can't do anything. So now the next ask, I'm sure this fall will be, why aren't you doing anything? You have the ability, why aren't you doing anything now? So, and that's just how
I wonder how long it'll take before they get the budget to actually be able to run those basically complaints down, vet them out, what the due diligence process looks like.
I don't think it's necessarily the budget in it by itself. I think it might just be like who is telling them what to do. So like Sean Duffy now as DOT the Secretary of the Department of Transportation, like he, if it gets in his ear that like this is a priority, he could direct his his agency to do what, prioritize X, Y, and Z, right? You have the ability. This is top priority. It's supposed to come from the top down, I believe, and that'll, how does it come from the top down? Through lobbying efforts and, notoriety, and people have to know what the issue is before there's push in a certain direction. You know what I mean? So
I ran into one yesterday. I was talking with a prospect, and this company was like, I was looking at their contract, and the contract was written to both the shipper and the trucking company that they said was a wholly owned subsidiary of the shipper, right? And I was like, well, who are we running credit for to set you guys up to like onboard you? It's like, oh, this company, which was the transportation company, right? And we said, oh, okay, what's your MC? That MC was a trucking company. So then the next question was, well, just so we're clear, because we had a BOL and we had seen one about this company. So I was like, but your tenders show the company that owns you. So are they tendering the freight and you're paying us? And they were like, well, yeah. And I was like, well, if you're a trucking company, how are you handling the invoicing, but they're tendering the freight when you don't have the authority to arrange transportation outside of your own assets? And then the guy didn't really have an answer. And we just kind of like left it, ran credit. And I'm like, I genuinely don't know what we're going to do with the situation, because it for sure seemed like a situation where they were basically just one trucking company was just retendering the loads for that shipper.
Wow. Yeah. What's wild is like I talked to a guy a few weeks ago that like he's a broker, and he like tried to set up a trucking company with a customer because he's like, this is how I've always done it. And it's like, no. Wait, like it was basically like a sister company of the brokerage. Mm-hmm. And he's like, I just set up the trucking company. The customer turns me the loads and I broker them out. I'm like, dude, you understand that's double brokering, right? Like this is like the fraud in the industry that we're talking about here. He's like, oh, okay. I'm like,
you know what I think?
You got to be kidding me.
To your point, like I think the real confusion comes from the verbiage used to describe it, because like when people say double brokering, they assume it's a broker and a broker. Like that's co-brokering, and that happens all of the time, right? What it really is like you said, unauthorized or brokering freight unlicensed, right? Because as a trucking company, you don't have the authority to take a load and then arrange transportation outside of your own assets. That really should just, I feel like, clearly be defined differently. And it would clear up a lot of confusion as to what is double brokering as opposed to unlicensed brokering and co-brokering, which are really the two different scenarios.
Yep. Yeah, you're absolutely right. You're right. All right. Well, good stuff. We'll see how everything unfolds as we make our way through 2025. All right. Let's talk. This is the stuff everyone. Oh, and before we get into the prospecting and getting your first shipment, great response from the audience out there on these reaction videos on cold calling. So we'll keep those coming. Someone commented saying like, "Can you guys role play?" And here's the thing, like. We can role play all day long, but it's never going to be authentic, right? The authentic content is the actual someone talking to a shipper. So, yeah, I mean, and you and I don't work at the same brokerage, so we're not going to hop on the phone together and call a shipper. But what we do, which is kind of a meet in the middle, is we watch someone authentically talking to a shipper, cold calling them, prospecting them, and then we give our what you could consider mock call, like role playing. We give our critique on what we would have said and how we would have just any tips to improve, because some of these, like one of the ones we did, we actually thought the girl did very good in a lot of aspects. So a lot of it is, hey, great job on this, here's something you could have done differently. But yeah, we'll definitely keep that stuff coming. So,
and here's the thing that I think that really seems different to me, and I thought about this a lot, right, is it's a controlled environment versus a live environment, right? And this literally, so like I had a tennis lesson last night, and I spent the past 3 months learning how to hit a tennis ball controlled, where somebody's literally hitting it probably to the same place or throwing the ball so it's easier to judge, right? And I'm like, I am really getting better at this. Well, yesterday and last week, my last two lessons, we played live with points. So it was more of like an actual match, right? And he told me this right before we started. He's like, I will promise you, you're going to get frustrated, irritated, and you're going to feel like everything you've learned goes out the window. And in my head, I'm like, no, I'll be calm. I'll be able to do exactly what you said, keep low, do these things, these reminders. And sure as shit, within 3 minutes of playing points, I got frustrated because I wasn't winning. I got irritated and I forgot everything he showed me. And he's like, this is the next level. It's learning how to deal with things as they come at you, right? And I think cold calling is very similar, right? Like you can role play, but again, you don't have the nerves there. You're not risking or feeling like you could lose this potential customer by saying the wrong thing. And those are the things that you've got to practice so that it's not just confidence, it's so that you get used to being in that environment and you stay calmer and you can just talk to them like a person. But you can't build that habit or that muscle without putting yourself in the scary situation with the risk. It's like you can learn to ride a bike with training wheels, but as soon as you take them off, it is a completely different experience. And now you've got to learn how to feel and to deal with your balance, how fast you're moving, because those variables just aren't on the table when you got training wheels. And that's why we say, like, you got to make a few hundred calls just live. Like, just go in with some sort of plan, try to have a conversation. You're going to fumble around. You're going to get nervous. Your face is going to get red. You're going to get frustrated. But that's what you're actually training yourself to do, is to put yourself in the stress environment to get used to it so you can start dealing with that and having real conversations that have potential upside and downside.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about the frustration people have in freight, time is money and efficiency is key. That's where Levity comes in. Imagine automating your email operations to do more with less effort. Levity connects directly to your inboxes, extracting vital information from emails and attachments in real time. It seamlessly integrates with your TMS, empowering you to quote faster, build loads more efficiently, and book more freight in less time. Whether it's incoming emails from shippers or carriers, Levity's got you covered. It understands any language, any format, and even interprets non-standard formatting. Visit levity.ai today to sign up and get started.
Tired of struggling to find accurate rates and the right carriers for your freight? With DAT1, you can access more than 500 million posted loads and trucks every year. That's 3 times more capacity than any other load board. Plus, their integrated freight management system makes it easy to cover loads 24/7. They have the most trusted network of carriers, brokers, and shippers in the country. You'll get real-time rates on every lane so you know exactly how much a shipment will cost before you commit to it. Plus, you get instant access to top bids from qualified carriers around the country. Get 10% off your first year of DAT1 when you visit the link in the show notes.
They go through a call and like you get hung up. Somebody asked on LinkedIn the other day, they're like, hey, just started a job at a brokerage. And we're going to answer this question on Final Mile that will release Tuesday, but asked like, what's the one piece of advice you wish someone gave you? And part of what I said was like, don't take it personally if you get hung up on or like sworn at or reject, whatever, right? Like it's part of it. So like when you go through, let's say you do a couple dozen calls and you like your instinct is to be like, man, like that didn't go well. The reality is like you're that much closer to like perfecting that. And I think that's the mindset shift that you need to embrace, because you're right. It's going to be a couple hundred, maybe 500 or more calls before you're like, all right, I kind of feel comfortable in my own skin here. But yeah.
It was funny, right? Because it's like, and again, it's like that, whatever, cliche. It's like every miss gets you closer to a win because you're recalibrating, getting a little better to get it closer to that target, right? And it's funny because like what I said to my wife after my lesson yesterday is my coach wanted to keep stopping and telling me what I was doing wrong in the middle of it. And in my head, I'm just like, dude, just keep hitting more balls at me. Like I understood what you said. I just need to keep trying until I get it. Like you don't need to keep explaining. The words aren't going to help me with the motor skills, right? Like moving your body in a way. In the same way, language, right? Like just us teaching somebody and explaining it. We could spend 3 days explaining everything we've learned, but all that goes out the window when you put somebody in the environment and they've got to actually put themselves in that situation.
Yeah, if you read a book that talks through long distance running and strategies of how to, like, if you do intervals, you'll help increase your pace. And if you do longer runs, it'll help your cardiovascular system and your breathing long term for those longer runs. That's great to like read a book on it. But until you get out there and start running and doing intervals and all that, like it doesn't matter. Like I remember 10 years ago or so, I was like, all right, I was never like big into running. And a friend of mine in the Army were like, yeah, let's train for a half marathon. And so one of the guys in the unit was like really skilled at distance running and created like this plan and kind of like talked me through and coached me through different techniques and all that. But none of that mattered until I went out there and started to run, right? I had to start doing sprints. I had to do 2 miles and then 3 miles and then 4 miles and then 5 miles and then 6 and 7, 8, 9, 10, right? Like, and until I did that, my body and my mind were not fully developed to be able to do the distance runs. And the same thing goes with really any skill. It's the whole like 10,000 hours of this, of a skill will help you master it. It's the same thing with making calls, right? You're going to get.
I can imagine the military is like that
tones
too.
Of voice. What's that?
The thing I wanted to ask you when you brought up the military, like I got to imagine the military trains in a similar way, where like you shooting a gun in a controlled environment is step one. You maybe doing that live with paintball is maybe run. 2.
Yeah.
But 3 is like if somebody's literally shooting at you, your adrenaline is going to spike at a completely different rate. Your heart rate is going to change. And to practice being in combat versus being in a controlled environment, I got to imagine are worlds apart.
Yeah, so there's to give you an example of the Army has a new weapons qualification system, and there's 6, they call them tables. Like table 1 is it's basically like your like levels of the actual training. And there's 6 tables. I'm trying to actually look it up so I don't misspeak here. I'll just try to go from memory. But basically, like you start with like literally classroom instruction, and then you have preliminary marksman instruction, which is like hands on a rifle that doesn't have any ammunition, and you're learning how to clear it, how to operate it properly, how to handle a jam, malfunctions, etc. And then you do an electronic training simulator, ETS or EST, electronic simulation training, where it's like an actual like air-powered rifle that you're shooting at a screen, and it shoots a laser at it, and you can hit the target down. And then you go out to the range, and you do like practice with the live rounds shooting at targets. And then you do a dry run on your actual qualification. And then finally, your final table 6 is your qualification. So like that's going through step by step by step each time, making it, you're adding a little bit more to this scenario. And again, all of that is still in a controlled environment, right? So you think about how you break down the steps there, not to mention when you go out to an actual a combat environment when you don't know the variables in where they're going to happen, when they're going to happen, how they're going to happen, etc. So, and this is why I take it back to cold calling, is like you're going to have, and this is actually a great segue into our episode today, but like you're going to have different objections, you're going to have different questions that you have to field from the customers. You're going to have different scenarios on the shipment, different commodities, different times of the year, different regions, different equipment types, like all this stuff. It takes a lot of time and a lot of repetition to learn it. You can consume our content all day long, but if you don't actually take it and apply it and tweak it to your own personal situation, it's really useless. You're just listening to 2 guys talk about freight. You've got to take it and apply it.
Here's one of the simple ones that I ran into recently. So I've seen the same doctor for something with my back for like 6-7 years, and why that's relevant is like I've seen this guy like every 2 months for a very long period, right? And when I saw him 2 months ago in like November, I saw him early in the morning before his day was busy, and he was just present with me. And again, like I know him well enough now. We talk about our kids and have like a conversation like you and I would have, right? And then when I saw him recently, like 2 weeks ago, I went in the afternoon when there was just a full waiting room. He's got tons of stuff to do, and I could feel him stressed. And the tone of the conversation what he was willing to talk about and how deep it went was just like night and day. Like went from spending 25 minutes talking about everything and catching up. And then the last one was like, I had 2.5 minutes to basically let him know what was going on, symptoms, blah, blah, blah. He's telling me what, next steps are. And then I'm out the door. And I was thinking about that and related to our job because it's like, this is someone I have a clear rapport with, a long track record with. But even somebody, once you've done all those things, we also always forget the variable of what is that person's life looking like right now when you're calling them? Did that
Yeah.
did the shipper you called have a super stressful day where 3 trucks didn't pick up, his manager yelled at him, someone called off work, and his dog was sick this morning? Like, you can't control that. That is going to be a different conversation than if you talk to him on a Friday afternoon when his boss took off, everybody showed up for work, every load picked up, and he's looking forward to the weekend, right? There are things you're just not going to be able to know or gauge, to your point, just in human interactions that come really into play in cold calling. So like somebody asked, like, can you guys write a perfect script? This is why you can't write one thing to say to everybody, even if they have the same job in every situation, because their days are different. What's going on over there? Their needs change, their stress levels, how much they slept that night. All of those things affect whether or not they pick up the phone at all, give you 30 seconds to get across what you need to say, or give you 5 minutes where they give you all the time in the world and they're very nice to you. Sometimes that has nothing to do with what you've done or said. It was just the time and day at which you reached out. That's why it's so important. You got to follow up with the same person sometimes 5 or 6 times. I always say different days of the week, different times of the day. When you catch somebody in a different mood, you will get a different response, regardless of the script or what you're going to say going into it.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely right. So, yeah, so let's get really focused here on the getting across the finish line with converting the customer, right? So we've talked about lead generation, prospecting, building that rapport. I really want to dig into what does it look like when you have to ask for that first load, or you become aware of an opportunity for that first load, and you've got to try and figure out, how do I price this? What does the market look like right now? So there's a lot that'll go into this. We'll try to hit on as many parts as possible. But I do want to point out that a customer is not just going to offer you business. I mean, you might be offered a load every now and then after you build rapport up, but you really need to take the initiative and ask. And there's multiple different ways that these conversations can go. But a lot of times, and back to the whole script thing, like, it's going to be situationally dependent. This is why I'm a big fan of having like bullet points of like things to ask, just things to be aware of. But it could be, if you're going to go the route of like, I have trucks in the area, right? And I always kind of joke about this. It could be as simple as, hey, I have a driver in your area. Do you have anything going outbound today that needs a reefer, right? I'm asking, right? And that's just one basic, simple way to do it. It could be, hey, is there anything on your desk today that you guys are having a big issue with that you would like me to work on? Or, hey, do you guys have any upcoming bids? Or if you notice, the same thing that's in common about all these is it's me asking for the business and without me saying, can you give me a load? Right?
Yep.
What are your thoughts on other ways that you can ask for the business in that regard?
Again, so like if you've had a few conversations, one, hopefully you've learned these important things. One, do they ship full truckload? I can't tell you how many prospects I'd called at first and seen other people call, and 3-4 months later you find out they ship 2 LTLs a week and you wasted a whole bunch of time. So qualifying. Do they ship full truckload? I always say like trying to benchmark at least 20 loads a week. The reason 20 loads a week, and I've always used it, is like normally at about that, you probably need a broker at least from time to time, because like if you got 5 shipments a week, that person probably can quote and rearrange and recover their own loads with plenty of time without really needing a broker very much. So again, that number's subjective. There are customers I've had that ship less volume and way more, but like trying to understand what that looks like, right? And trying to get to learn a little bit about them. What does the process look like to get onboarded? I'm always asking, before I'm going to close, like, hey, like, is it like a decision-making process? Is it like a committee that approves your vendors? Do they go through procurement? Are you the person that can onboard a carrier? Do you guys have an agreement? Even if we're not even talking about working together, that's what I call like a trial close. I'm not asking for the load yet, But I'll usually ask prior to that is, hey, look, like I don't even know if it would be a fit together, but if you wouldn't mind, I'd love to be able to take a look at your agreements just to make sure we've got all the requirements if you do need something down the road. If it's not too much on your end, I'd like to be able to review it, see what you guys are looking for, make sure we actually could even provide the things you require of your vendors. Again,
Yeah.
it's an easier yes to get before I'm trying to get freight and to get them to trust me to move their business. It is just getting them used to reciprocation. Can you provide me something that I can take a look at to see if this might be a fit?
I'll add in too. Yeah, you made a really good point because shippers operate differently from each other. It's not like a standard way, but like because some shippers have all contract, like they have a bid, they contract, they award contracts to certain providers, and then the only time that they would deviate is if a tender is rejected or maybe something is unexpected, right? Then you have shippers that are kind of a mix. They might have a set of contracted lanes, and then they've got their spot market that pops up daily, or they get a couple days in advance based on purchases or orders that happen outside of their projections.
Yes.
And then you have some where it's like just straight load list. Like literally they email it out every day. And it's not like that's not great business long term, but it's not a bad place to start if you're really new. For a quick win is to like that could be your ask, like, hey, would you be able to add me to your daily load list? Right? Yep. Asking for the business. And that'll get you fast tracked to the quoting and bidding process that we'll kind of dig through as well. Highly competitive, very low margin.
Yes.
You tend to see this stuff in low risk freight because they're not really worried about who they're giving it to. They just care about price. So lumber is like a classic example. General building materials like brick, stone, it's really hard to ruin it. It doesn't usually matter if it's delayed by a little bit because it's probably going to like a lumber yard or a wholesale distribution place that sells these. It could be going to Lowe's, Menards, like whatever. So those are, but again, you got to ask for the business. Can you add me to your daily load list or your weekly load list, whatever that looks like?
And the questions, the way I think about it is like, I don't think about we have the list of questions. I think they're on our website. We'll send them to anybody that wants them, like just a comprehensive list of basically almost every question you could think of. And when I started, I literally would just print them out, had them on my desk. And when I couldn't think of what to say, I just literally flipped the page, asked one of them. And if it worked, I'd highlight it. And then I just worked through until I found the ones that I thought were more effective. But later, the way I approach it now is I think like, first principles. And all that means is what is the simplest way you can think about this? Because if you can break it down to something simple, you can probably use that over and over again, right? So what we just said is like, okay, what I'm trying to understand is what is the decision-making process for how you choose a carrier, right? Option one, it's a TMS. The only way you get into the TMS is you go through the bid. If you're approved, you're either awarded a lane or maybe you're added to their spot list, but you only get the option to move a load if someone else rejects it. It kicks you out an email because you're next on the list because you had a higher rate. You can accept it or reject it. That is the only way you're ever going to get freight. The second one, to your point, load lists. They're sending out a list of every loads every day or every week. Whoever sends in the cheapest rate the quickest with some correlation to service, maybe they'll tender that load to you, right? And then the third one is like, hey, they're tendering loads out every day. They're sending quotes out to a few brokers. They'll usually factor in service and price to see who's going to be able to pick it up and get it to where it's supposed to. The next question is, okay, what's the process? The other question I always ask is like, okay, like what does the time look like on you tendering loads? And what I always mean by that, and I'll usually have to explain, is like, okay, when do the orders hit your desk, Nate, and when do you expect to book a truck? Are you getting them the same day that you want to put a truck on it? Like you get the load this morning and you need to book that load to pick up today? Okay, very short time window, very hard to work with a trucking company, really good for a broker there. Or you have all your orders last week, you send them all out for some bids, you pick and choose. By Thursday, every load for next week is already booked. And then the ones that don't pick up, you then go to the spot market to find someone else to pick up, right? Because the shorter the time, you can start to factor in how they're making this decision.
On the opposite end there, because I want to break this down. This is where commodity matters, right? Lumber is a great example of like they produce a lot. It can ship like daily. They could have variance because they don't know how much is going to get produced or ordered, right? But it's quick production. On the flip side, I've probably used the heat exchanger example in the past. So like one of the customers used to have, they made heat exchangers for various industrial uses. Some of it was actually military for Navy ships. But the production and the lead time and the production timeline is very long on those. So they know well in advance. The only variance is like it's coming well in advance, but it's a matter of what day is it actually going to be done and be able to be shipped out. But you know like months in advance because they're working on producing this, this product. So those are like I just wanted to give two examples there because you're
great.
absolutely right on that lead time. Those are definitely questions you want to be asking a prospect when you're talking with them on the phone.
And then to loop back, so let's say it's option 1. It's a TMS. We have a bid window. Okay, the next question I want to understand is, what does the bid process look like? Is it a 45-day bid process? Is it 1 round, 2 rounds, 3 rounds? Do you provide feedback? How does the bid process work for you guys? And then what determines if we actually get in? So you can understand as much as possible. Is that someone's approval or is that just done based on numbers, whatever rates are? How do you weight those things? Trying to understand the game you're playing in this situation. How does this person that you're talking to make the decisions so you can help to position yourself to be awarded something, right? And it's really the same other questions where like my last question is, hey, are there ever scenarios where you've got a lane that ran all the way through your waterfall and nobody picked it up? Do you ever make exclusions where you need somebody outside your system to move a load because the system failed? And that happens. Like, and maybe I wouldn't say system failed, but like, hey, nobody's accepted a load. What happens to it then? They'll usually say like, oh, I've got a list of some other trusted brokers that have been reaching out to us for a year or two. I'll give them a shot. If they can move it, I'll get an exclusion. My boss will sign off and we can get you into our system in the middle of the year. So that was always a way for us when I used to work at a big brokerage. Even if you couldn't get in a big bid, you knew there was an occasional time where a load might come through in a distribution list where if you could go and get a truck on it very quickly, that you would get that waiver and now you're in the system. Now you're getting access to the waterfalls, sometimes bid portals that you just didn't have access to if you didn't get in the first time. So there are multiple ways to try to close that one or to be able to thread the needle to find an opportunity to slip in the door, if you will.
Yeah, I'll add in too the market and where, like, on a macro level and on a micro level is very impactful on how this stuff happens. Like we saw routing guides just collapse during the COVID boom, right? And what I mean there is when I say routing guide, I mean, let's say someone went through a bid, they've got, this carrier number 1 was awarded the bid. If they rejected, carrier 2 gets offered the bid. If they rejected, carrier 3 and so on, right? And eventually when demand went through the roof and the supply couldn't meet up with it, rates elevated because, it's like, if you want my truck, you're going to pay for it. So literally the carriers that were contracted loads were basically saying like, nah, man, I'm not going to take that $2 a mile, shipment. I want to go chase this $3.50, $4 a mile one. And the routing guides collapsed. So understanding where the market's at and having that conversation with the shippers too, like, hey, how do you guys handle situations when, X, Y, and Z happens, right? And a lot, like we've said before, a lot of times a traffic manager might not be someone that's very sophisticated or very knowledgeable of the freight market, where it's at, where it might be heading to, the impact, things that impact it, and whatnot. So your ability to educate them, talk through those, and kind of like probe to see what would need to be true for you to be a value add, transportation provider for them, right? And then I want to add in like the repetition is really where a lot of this stuff happens, and a lot of this comes back with follow-up. But if you're calling, 8, 10, a dozen times to a customer, checking in to see how their operation's going, did anything slip through the cracks that they need you to work on, or hey, maybe you've got a truck in the area, or whatever you want to say, that is there a fit for that, a shipment for that truck. When that time comes up that they do have a situation where you might become a value add and you are calling them that day, that's like a win-win. I've even had the situation where like I get the call because I've made 15, 20 calls previously, right? And it's that pleasant persistence without being annoying, right? You are very clearly the top, if not one of the top person in their mind that they can go to when all else fails. And you multiply this out over hundreds of prospects in your pipeline. This is where you finally get to turn that one stone where there's a nugget underneath it. So,
and the way I've always thought of this too is like you kind of need both, right? Like you've said, everyone's heard the cliche of like it's when opportunity meets effort, it's what luck looks like, right?
Yep.
And like I thought about that when I was trying to learn to surf last year, because like you could be really good at that, but if there's no waves coming in, there's not much you can do. And vice versa, there could be lots of waves, and if you didn't practice, you're not going to do very well either. You really kind of need both. And the market does have waves in it. So in some instances, you might be talking to a prospect for 3 or 4 months, building good rapport, and they might just be like, look, man, everything's good. Like all our stuff's picking up. We've got good service, but if something does arise, we'll let you know, right? And sometimes you just kind of have to wait for that wave to meet the effort you put in. And when they do, to your point, they call you out of the blue, you get an email, hey, I'm jammed up on this load. If you can give me a hand, I'd love to be able to work with you. And all of a sudden, opportunities just start to arise. Like, where did all these come from? Well, it came from all the phone calls you put in that you thought didn't do anything, but you also had to be a little patient, right?
Yeah.
And like a practical way that you can do this, and I did this one recently, like, so in GenLogs, I can use shipper insights to see lanes that shippers move. Well, I always look for markets that shift drastically because through the holidays, we saw a lot of this. Like one of the lanes, I think it was like Detroit to like Savannah, a similar lane, right? That lane was hitting like 350 to 450 a mile in the afternoons. Now, it wasn't that in the morning, but you could tell the market was tightening up. Not as many carriers wanted to go there. So when I was speaking to shippers that move that lane, I didn't say, hey, I know what's happening. Do you want to learn this? I'm like, hey, I'm just curious. Like, we've seen a lot of movement on a few of these lanes. Curious if you guys move it. Are you guys moving a lot of like the Michigan to Georgia area much? And they might have said, yeah, we move at time to time. Hey, just curious, have you guys run into any capacity issues on that lane? And again, if I've talked to them twice, they're almost always going to tell me no, even if it's true, because they don't know me enough to give me the truth. But then I just go, hey, the reason I was bringing that up is like, we've seen some huge market moves on that lane on Tuesdays and Thursdays after Thanksgiving, where that rate went from like $2 a mile to like $4.50 in the afternoon. And I don't know if you get your loads picked up mostly in the morning or you book them ahead of time, but just giving you a heads up, if you guys are moving that, like that's something to keep an eye out for. But hey, like I said, it was nice catching up with you. Maybe down the road, there'll be some opportunity for us to connect, and then I'll literally get out of that call. I left him with that thought right in the back of his mind where he's thinking, well, we do move that lane. And I haven't really seen it, but I've seen my loads pick up a little slower or get moved to the next day more frequently, right? Now that starts to happen a little bit more. Now, even in the back of his mind, when I follow back up and ask that follow-up question a week or two later, he's more inclined to tell me a little bit more the truth because I'm providing value in the insight of the market that he's not going to see from his point of view.
Yep.
We'll see that as brokers, or even on as a dispatcher on the carrier side. But a shipper is usually only going to be able to see like lane averages. They might see overall lane averages change, but they're not going to see drastic fluctuations in the market that we see covering freight from 8 in the morning to 5 at night. Those are the things that you can bring into these phone calls to help build rapport and to show them like, you're not just asking for a load. You can actually provide value to their supply chain.
Yeah, no, you're precisely right. So, I mean, literally in a nutshell here, it's the persistence and having to ask for the business that's going to eventually get you to the opportunity. Once you've put the calls in, you've built the rapport, you're asking the right questions. It's a very generalized formula that we're giving you, but it somewhat like applies to all of the situations. So as far as getting to the quoting part of it, we'll probably have to do a part 4 on this series because we dug deep on this one. But really, I want to kind of like give you the preview of what the next step looks like. So customer says, you know what? Hey, here's this one that I've got an issue with today. And I'll just make it up. Let's say I've got, we're shipping out of Chattanooga. We're trying to get this to Birmingham. Drive-in, right? Now you got to think, okay, how do I quote this? How do I even find a carrier? What are the requirements for it? How much time do I have? And this is where you get to the next part where if you do all the right things up to this point and then you fail at your first take at it, you've just taken like 10 steps backwards. You might have just blown up the entire relationship, right? So what I caution people on is if the one load that you're offered is truly something that you aren't comfortable working on, like if they're going to give you a oversized hazmat load and you're a new broker, like I'd probably be like, hey, I appreciate it. That's not something that that I specialize in. I'd probably do you more harm than good. Sometimes that honesty and pushing it back will get you a step further with your rapport and trust with them. Anything else you want to add on this part? Because I do want to give the actual quoting part a full deep dive on an episode. Yeah,
we'll do that next week.
Yeah,
and I think it's a good draw line, because like this is what I feel should precede the quoting, and I feel like this is the part that's missed that we talked about in this episode. Like really asking questions to at least understand the situation a little better than looking at a lane and trying to throw your cheapest rate out because you don't want to pick up the phone and you just want to send an email because it's easier, right? See far more of that with newer brokers than developing the skill, which takes hard work, and overcoming fear, which is picking up the phone and having conversations to learn a little bit more about the load. But the other thing is when you practice this, even though it is harder and it is scarier, right? And you will be more frustrated, you will gain so many more valuable customers over the long run. But more importantly, when we cover the next piece, this is where you're going to get feedback into determining how to price it. Do you need to be below market? Do you need to be at market? Can you be a little bit above market? Where you're going to pick on a pricing metric to send this rate is based on the information you can only get through a conversation. A customer or a shipper is never going to email you these details about how they make that decision. They're never going to email you their target rates. And if they do, you can be assured they're bullshit. Like they're not true. Those are their wishful hope for pay rates, right? And until you can have those conversations and actually start to talk to them and get some of this info, your success rate when we get to the numbers part is going to be abysmal. I mean, I've seen some exceptions to this. Like there's a guy I work with now, like he's like legit Rain Man, where he can see markets and days of the week where he knows he can pay a little less because he knows equipment needs to get there on certain days, where he can very consistently quote below market and still win and cover the loads. But you are talking at something that was developed over years and years of covering loads all day long, quoting hundreds of loads every day. Like that is developable, but it is not something you're just going to be able to do in a few days. However, you can do this with information and feedback from the person you're negotiating with to find ways that are win-wins where you can actually be awarded the load.
Absolutely. Yeah. I'm looking forward to talking the quoting part. There's so much that goes into it. And it's not always just giving them one price. You got options, right? So yep. We'll get into that in the next episode. But any final thoughts here?
Whether you believe you can or believe you can't, you're right.
And until next time, go Bills. That wraps up this episode of Freight 360. Check out the show notes for links to anything that we've referenced on this episode. And make sure to visit us online at freight360.net to see our entire library of episodes, videos, blogs, and more.
And make sure to check us out on Facebook and subscribe to our YouTube channel for daily and weekly tips and content. And if you'd like your question answered on the show, fill out the Contact Us form on our site, and we'll see you next week.